Chapter 1616 Surrounding the Silver Armor. At this moment, the black and white commander and Flower were caught in a white-hot battle, a life-and-death struggle between giant beasts, making it difficult to quickly distinguish a winner from a loser. This was because they were both mutants beasts, with extremely strong defenses. Even if they were torn to pieces and covered in blood, it was difficult to be killed quickly. However, Liang Yu came running from a distance, and this aura directly caused the black and white commander to break his defense. Even one-on-one might not be able to win, how could one-on-two even play? Flower let out an excited whine from her blood-covered mouth. Liang Yu gripped the long sword tightly and slashed down from the back, aiming directly at the black and white commander. On top of the ocean, Silver Armor was fighting unusually woefully at this time, while Liang Yu was just consuming it without panic. While fighting, he did not forget to verbally attack him. As a great general, if you just run away like this, your men will be wiped out completely. Originally, I thought that you came to attack Tianhai City with more or less a little bit of weight. But now that I look at it, it's really lame. Although Zhang Yi's mouth was high on attacking, he didn't slack off at all when he struck out to attack. The sword in the tree was extremely restrictive to the silver armor, making him have to keep striking out to relieve the situation. This, coupled with Liu Karen and Zhang Yi's attacks, did not allow him to slack off for a second. Silver Armor was furious in his heart as he stared at Zhang Yi and said coldly, "Don't get complacent too early, your death is already inevitable. Anyone who offends the Wuluan Empire will eventually find it difficult to escape death." Zhang Yi put away the teasing smile on his face and looked at Silver Armor with murderous intent. "Then it's better for you to die first." He had his fill and once again aimed his sword finger at Silver Armor. A shot of star-piercing cannon hit his chest with unerring accuracy. Silver Armor's arms protected his chest as the lightning boundary was activated once again to defuse Zhang Yi's attack. However, at this moment, he was too tired, and the successive battles had caused him to be unable to build up his energy, thus this strike was blasted directly into the sea by Zhang Yi. Boom! 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 His body crashed through the vines within a range of thousands of meters, those dry trees, each of which was more than 2 meters thick in diameter, just crashing all the way through so hard, it wasn't easy for Silver Armor. Bang! He was shot into the middle of the sea by Zhang Yi. Zhang Yi sneered and then followed him over to dive into the sea, and in the dark and pitch-black ocean, the sword in the tree grew even faster, snaking towards Silver Armor like dense water plants. The movement of the Silver Armor in the water was not convenient, his speed was greatly restricted, instead, he was entangled by the large number of vines growing from the sword in the tree. He desperately broke free from his body and rushed out towards the surface of the sea. Zhang Yi was in hot pursuit, and all sorts of technology and ruthlessness were given out. In order to keep himself alive, Zhang Yi's right-hand sword in the tree and his left-hand white eagle were consuming Silver Armor unceasingly. Time passed minute by minute. After half an hour had passed, all the armor on Silver Armor's body was broken to pieces, revealing his true form. It was a humanoid creature with a reddish body, with arms covered in fine scales, dozens of short, thick horny projections sprouting from his head, and a long tail growing behind him. The creatures of the Wuluan Empire turned out to be this kind of cargo? Zhang Yi realized that he looked somewhat similar to that giant creature from the Nash Kingdom, but not exactly the same. However, if it was confirmed that the other party was a creature that existed on the planet in the ancient times, and then survived in 2 completely different spaces to this day, it was normal for differences to arise. That's a tough one. Zhang Yi looked down at the bruised Silver Armor and couldn't help but sigh so. However, at this moment, inside Silver Armor's eyes, a look of panic was written all over them, as if he was worried about something. Zhang Yi thought of the divine nest sun god of Edo's divine nest sun god from earlier, and subconsciously raised his head to look at the sky. What they fear, is the thunder above the sky? Thunder tribulation? Zhang Yi was only able to think of this term in his mind. Could it be that in this world, there really existed a creator who was able to harness everything and maintain the order of the world? And at this moment, a huge creature flew in the distance. It was Flower flying over. On its back, Liang Yu was carrying a head in one hand that belonged to the black and white commander. Zhang Yi, the enemies that invaded Tianhai City have all been taken care of, Liang Yu said to Zhang Yi. Silver Armor's heart completely sank at this moment. The troops he led were all killed in battle. Even if he escaped back this time, he would completely lose his position in the Wuluan Empire. Zhang Yi reached out and pointed at Silver Armor. Just in time, join me and kill this fellow. Silver Armor raised his head. The resentment in his eyes was like a tidal wave as he let out an angry roar towards Zhang Yi. It was a roar of grief and despair. I know, you're furious, but it's useless. Who made you such a rookie? Zhang Yi pulled out his ears. He had long gotten used to this kind of incompetent rage from his enemies. Those who fought him in the past, but couldn't win against Zhang Yi, ended up being so hardened by Zhang Yi. They couldn't win, and they couldn't escape. But on the contrary, when facing Zhang Yi, it would give people a feeling of torture. If Zhang Yi was really too much stronger than him, and directly crushed him, he would have been convinced. But Zhang Yi was just purely strong in defense and had a disgusting ability. Many people who had fought with Zhang Yi had commented on him as a sinister and difficult mollusk. Regardless of whether he can beat you or not, as long as you fight with him, you will definitely be disgusted. Now that his helpers had arrived, Zhang Yi was even more confident as he said to Liang Yu and Flower, that guy's attacks are very strong, so it's hard for you guys to block them with your strength. So hide behind me and assist me in attacking him. Remember, I know you guys are strong in melee combat, but don't easily engage him in melee combat. Zhang Yi would not take his enemy lightly. He had seen the power of Silver Armor's thunder, and even his own everything under heaven was only barely able to withstand its power. If he were to replace Flower or Liang Yu, he was afraid that Silver Armor would be able to kill them in seconds with a single strike at full strength. Meow Dash understood. Flower and Liang Yu responded and thus stood at Zhang Yi's side and back, ready to assist Zhang Yi in launching his attack. Zhang Yi was still using the sword in the tree to start first, while the white eagle in his left hand kept shooting holy silver bullets, forcing the Silver Armor to have to defend all the time, not having the chance to think much. Flower, behind Zhang Yi, opened her mouth wide and began to gather energy. A red high-energy particle beam cannon took shape in its mouth and quickly grew larger, transforming into a huge energy cannon with a diameter of nearly 10 meters. I'll strike first, and when he's exhausted, you guys will launch attacks one after another. Don't give him a chance to catch his breath. Once his attention is distracted and there is a void in his body's supernatural energy, that will be his weakest moment. Zhang Yi raised the white eagle in his hand, and the black hole of emptiness behind him rapidly rotated as the power of emptiness condensed on top of the gun, transforming into a pitch-black bullet. Utilizing the white eagle, he shot a star-piercing cannon. Boom! A cannon shot, coupled with the everything follows the trail's prediction ability, made it impossible for Silver Armor to dodge, and he had to step out and use his scarred body to harness lightning to fend it off. And in that instant, Flower's high-energy particle beam cannon ruthlessly shot from the air towards Silver Armor. Chapter 16-17 Critical Battle Situation. At this moment, the Silver Armor already had to exert all its strength to block Zhang Yi's strike. As a result, he had just blocked an attack when Flower's attack came again. He fiercely clenched his right fist and slammed it fiercely towards his left side, like a sponge that had been squeezed without much moisture, and hardened his bones to squeeze out strength to defend against it. Although Flower's attack power was very strong, after all, there was a gap of more than 10,000 points of supernatural ability index between him and Silver Armor. So this strike was still stopped by Silver Armor. However, at this moment, the distant Tianhai City cannon also fired another strike. This time, it directly hit Silver Armor's body, sending him flying backwards 10,000 meters away from the impact. Ka-ching! His bones shattered and his flesh cracked directly, blood flowing out in rivulets along the lines of his muscles. But even so, he was still not killed. But at this point, he was already near exhaustion from the attacks he had endured one after another. Just as his body was about to fall into the sea, Zhang Yi opened the dimensional gate and sent Liang Yu below his body. Liang Yu's right hand gripped the hilt of Dragon's Roar's sword, and the distance between silver armor and her was less than 500 meters. This was within the range of her heavenly domain, nowadays. With herself as the center, she formed a not-so-large absolute field, and anything that appeared within the field would be slashed overnight. Clang! The long sword in Liang Yu's hand was sheathed, slashing out towards the sky. The black sword light was harsh and slender, forming a pitch-black curtain of light that ran along Silver Armor's head until his crotch, neatly as if it was a dividing line cut by a scalpel. Poof! Silver Armor's body was directly cut through the middle, and a large amount of blood gushed out. The combined strike of Zhang Yi's four did not give him the slightest chance to react until death. Zhang Yi swept across the sky and directly took Silver Armor's body into the dimensional space, and incidentally, naturally, his origin was also collected. This battle had finally come to an end. Tranquility was restored between heaven and earth, and it was only at this time that Zhang Yi opened his mouth and gasped for breath. The extremely rapid secretion of adrenal glands had just caused him to fall into a state of belligerence and calmness. However, it was only after the fight that his heart felt incredibly exhausted. This battle was very dangerous, if it wasn't for the fact that a few months ago, he had realized the crisis that might come and prepared in advance. Even if he could have won, it would have definitely been a disastrous victory. However, Yang Xinxin, who was inside his shadow, was still there, and he still had killing moves that he didn't use. Pay attention to being on guard. The enemy still has presence in other regions, and there is a possibility that they will launch an attack on Tianhai City afterward. Zhang Yi rubbed his brow. I'm going to take a rest first. You guys should rest as well, there might be another war soon. Don't really fall asleep. Also notify Deng Shintong to bring Heavenly God Squad over for support. The Heavenly God Squad's strength might not come in handy, but coming over to help patrol and monitor the movements around Tianhai City could still be done. Not everyone was like Zhang Yi, blocking the attack of Mutant Valley's mutant forces at what seemed to be a menacing, but in fact barely too great a cost. After all, Zhang Yi was the only one who knew clearly that sooner or later, Misty Valley would come over to him one day to settle the score. The other regions, on the other hand, had never thought that they would suffer an onslaught on such a scale. East Sea Region. Utilizing the heavenly dimensional weapon plus the space-based weapon, the two Azure Dragons, Black Tortoise and Azure Dragon, came out in unison, and finally, with great difficulty, blocked the attack of Misty Valley's forces, and didn't allow East Sea City to be directly flattened by the Misty Valley's combat forces. And on the front battlefield, hundreds of captain-level green armor warriors also welcomed their opponents. Just like Liang Yu, or just like Liang Yu before her, the quasi-epsilon level mutant ice prison vermilion bird, Jian Han. She arrived on top of the frontal battlefield, and the instant she descended, the temperature of the entire heaven and earth dropped by tens of degrees. The mutant people of Misty Valley raised their heads, only to see a gigantic ice-blue phoenix descending from the sky, its enormous blue wings flamboyant and dangerous. The vermilion bird descended to this place and plummeted to the ground from the air, its hands spewing icy blue flames directly towards the earth. Few dashed the flames blazed, attacking towards every Misty Valley warrior in all directions. Seeing this, those warriors dodged and resisted. However, the moment any means of defense came into contact with this ice-blue flame, it would quickly be swallowed clean of all power. In the next instant, the flames invaded above their bodies and began to absorb every ounce of temperature from their bodies. It was only then that the Misty Valley warriors realized the terrifying nature of the visitor. A top ability user among the human camp? Interesting. A soldier chief said in a deep voice. With a wave of his hand, a dozen elite warriors slowly surrounded towards the front. Silver armor stood high above the sky, and in front of him was the sea that roared and undulated, as well as the gigantic black tortoise. Sea beasts, is it? Interesting. To actually transform its body into a large weapon, this is indeed a very genius idea. Beneath silver armor's feet, a large number of sea beast corpses were sinking and floating in the middle of the ocean, and around his body, a huge long river of blood flowed, like a ribbon slowly flowing around him. Black Tortoise did not utter a single word, quietly sinking his body in the middle of the sea water, looking like an island from afar. His eyes gazed at silver armor and said in a deep voice, "Invaders, leave this place. You cannot attack East Sea City." Silver armor clasped his hands to his chest and looked down on Black Tortoise from above. "Your power is indeed somewhat beyond my expectations. But compared to my Wuluan Empire, it is nothing more than a lowly and weak civilization," he said, extending his right index finger to point at Black Tortoise. "It's easy to want to overthrow you." As soon as the words fell, the long river of blood surged up, and from amongst the blood river, thousands of sharp arrows erupted, plummeting towards Black Tortoise's body. Shoo! 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 The bloody arrows filled all the surrounding space. Black Tortoise's huge size was simply difficult to avoid this rapid and intensive attack. He was still like a mountain that quietly suspended in the middle of the seawater, let those bloody arrows shot on top of his tortoise shell. The blood arrows pierced into his tortoise shell and quickly turned him into a red hedgehog. No matter how sharp those blood arrows were, they were unable to completely penetrate his defense. Interesting, even the inside of the turtle shell has been transformed into a fortress with metal. Silver armor saw through the problem at a glance, but he let out a cold smile as he reached forward with his right hand and clenched it in the air. In a flash, all the blood arrows burst into pieces. A terrifying force trembled in the void, and in the next moment, Black Tortoise felt the blood within his body fluttering as if it was being boiled, to gush out along his pores. Chapter 1618 Azure Dragon vs. Black and White Commander. This was the ability of the silver armor general who had descended upon East Sea City Bloodmaster. He could catalyze the blood within a creature's body and kill his opponent directly from the inside. The blood arrow was just a superficial attack, this move was the real backhand. Black Tortoise's mouth and nose couldn't help but shed a large amount of blood as his body swayed in the middle of the seawater. However, he still managed to endure this attack with his huge body. Looking at the silver armor in front of him, Black Tortoise opened his mouth, and a solid dark light cannon shot wildly at the silver armor in an instant. Boom! A swirling light instantly penetrated the area between the two, and the distance of less than 5,000 meters allowed the dark light cannon to arrive in front of silver armor in just a split second. Silver armor didn't seem to expect that in this situation, Black Tortoise would still fight to be injured to make a counterattack. Between his wits, he used the long river of blood to transform into a crystal-clear blood-colored sphere, completely wrapping his body in it. The dark light cannon heavily bombarded the blood-colored sphere, and the light illuminated the entire East Sea City. In an instant, the light receded. In midair, the blood-colored pearl catching. It shattered with a sound, and a large number of blood-colored fragments fell into the ocean. Silver armor pulled apart the eggshell-like blood-colored pearl jade with one hand and walked out of it unharmed. "Trying to injure me with your power is simply a dream." His voice was cold and indifferent, like a towering god looking down on the ants on earth. Black Tortoise's gaze deepened a few points. There was indeed a huge gap between his strength and the other parties. If it wasn't for the transformation of the military department and his strong defensive characteristics, at this point, he would have already been killed by the other party. He couldn't be defeated. He knew this very clearly in his heart, but as the number one combatant of East Sea City, he had to insist on fighting until the end. Even if it was death. When one was in this world, it might seem like there were many paths one could take, but most of the time, there was no choice in life. The moment Black Tortoise joined the East Sea region, he had been nurtured by the East Sea region by investing resources to the best of his ability, and he had shared both honor and disgrace with the East Sea region. The relationship between the two sides was one of loss and one of honor. If East Sea City was broken, then he wouldn't have the face to see the world again, so the only way to fight today was to die. Silver Armor, however, suddenly retreated thousands of meters away at this time, his eyes looking up high into the sky in fear. Black Taurus's dark light cannon had a limited deterrent effect on him, but the energy beam that fell from the sky before made him deeply afraid. That was one of the highest masterpieces in the current military field of mankind, space-based weapon. Like the king among heavenly dimensional weapons, the Reaper of Love, it possessed the power to kill and injure high-level mutants. Previously, Silver Armor had been injured by the space-based weapon, and at this point in time, he was too afraid of the existence above the sky to let go of his hands and make a move against Black Tortoise. Otherwise, this battle would only end faster. Silver Armor frowned. He only deeply realized at this moment that the information spied by the Wuluan Empire was still insufficient. The secrets of the highest levels of humanity were beyond the grasp of the undercover agents they sent out. If they were not restricted, they could easily exterminate this race. But the day of the fall had not come after all. And had they struck too soon? It looks like destroying the human city has been difficult to do. However, the task that needs to be accomplished still needs to be accomplished. His gaze looked towards East Sea City, and then towards Black Tortoise, who was deeply afraid of him. Poof! 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 In the middle of the deep sea, countless sea beasts were directly invaded by a powerful force and their bodies exploded, and a large amount of blood surged high into the sky, converging into Silver Armor's long river of blood. Let's erase the highest battle force here first. With a loud boom, the war between the two erupted once again. While in East Sea City, Azure Dragon took on the Black and White commander. He originally thought that after Silver Armor went to deal with Black Tortoise, he could lead the Sea Dragon force to easily suppress this invasion. But it did not occur to him that a mere deputy had shown overwhelming strength. The Water Azure Dragon God, which was transparent like a piece of gorgeous porcelain, crazily impacted the mutant of Misty Valley, who was wearing black and white armor warrior, in front of him. The other party's demeanor, on the other hand, was incomparably calm, and he didn't even bother to move his body from start to finish. In the face of Azure Dragon's attack, he merely raised his own right hand and casually flung it towards the side. Bang! Azure Dragon's huge body was unexpectedly thrown out uncontrollably and fiercely, crashing through a dozen large buildings. Nimble power. Azure Dragon recognized his opponent's ability at the first time. Numinous power, driven by the ability to think, could harness everything with just a thought. This kind of ability was very rare even amongst the trait system, offensive and defensive, extremely difficult to deal with. With a flick of the Black and White commander's fingers, dozens of buildings around him were unexpectedly pulled up hard from the ground and then smashed towards Azure Dragon. Azure Dragon hastily dodged to avoid these attacks. A tall building was like a spear, ruthlessly poking into the ground, emitting a deafening roar. Azure Dragon fled in a bit of a mess. He glanced back at the Black and White commander who had a godlike stance, and said in his heart, "Nimble power can drive everything, but the distance at which the ability can be unleashed is limited, so I need to keep a sufficient distance from him." Azure Dragon clenched his teeth and flew high into the air with a jerk. He flew thousands of meters up in one go, looking down from above the sky at the land beneath his feet. The East Sea City, which he was once most proud of, was littered with battles, and an unknown number of buildings had been destroyed. Even the impenetrable defensive barriers, like the Great Wall of Ice and Snow, had been blown down just because Silver Armor had casually struck a blow. Such a crime was absolutely unforgivable. Azure Dragon hovered high in the sky, his huge transparent body floating in midair like a levitation. In the next instant, his body suddenly erupted with an extremely brilliant light, and his entire body became even more transparent, to the point where one could even see the lines of his internal bones clearly. A yellow beam of light erupted from his body, descending onto the earth like falling rain, blasting towards the black and white commander. 10,000 Glaze Exhibition. Facing the thousands of attacks that came from the sky with unpredictable trajectories, the black and white commander slightly hooked the corners of his mouth. "Oh, what a nice fireworks show," he said softly. With that, he spread his hands wide and violently propped up an invisible psychic barrier around his body. Boom! 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 In an instant, all the attacks bombarded the black and white commander from all directions without exception, but they all landed on top of the psychic barrier. After a round of attacks, the black and white commander did not move. His body was spotless. Facing Azure Dragon's full force attack was like an adult facing a child. Chapter 1619. Who wasn't a genius? Azure Dragon did not expect that the opponent he encountered in his first battle after his promotion to Epsilon would be so difficult to deal with. The black and white commander said indifferently, "Time is running out, it's time to end this boring farce." He raised his head and surged up into the sky, his nimbus wrapped around his body as he flew high into the sky, heading straight for Azure Dragon. Roar! The Azure Dragon let out a roar of fury as he tilted his neck up, his long, narrow neck snapping forward like a long whip as he opened his mouth and spewed out a powerful atomic spit. The black and white commander used his right hand to unfurl a psychic barrier as he rose. He surprisingly topped Azure Dragon's attack and continued to accelerate upwards. At this scene, Azure Dragon's eyes were about to glaze over as he watched. What? My attacks didn't even have the slightest effect on him? The black and white commander's voice was cold and indifferent. A guy who just broke through the life level boundary and entered level 5. I surpassed your current level 2 years ago. As the black and white commander spoke, he had already rushed to Azure Dragon's proximity. After Azure Dragon's spitting ended, a huge panic had been felt inside. Between Epsilon, there was also a gap, and it was still incomparably huge. He roared angrily, and at close range, he tried to use the advantage of his huge body to launch an attack on the black and white commander. Boom! 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 He desperately slammed into the black and white commander's psychic barrier, but that small psychic barrier was difficult to break no matter how much he impacted it. The black and white commander smiled disdainfully and stretched out his right hand to its enormous body. Obviously, the black and white commander's body size was even smaller, but the way he reached out, it was like he was catching a small sparrow trying to escape. Ho! The black and white commander gave a firm grip, and in the void, a huge palm that was invisible to the naked eye and condensed with thought power directly clutched Azure Dragon's body. Ka-ching! The sound of bones breaking came. Azure Dragon's body directly twisted in midair, his bones were shattered, and large mouthfuls of blood kept flowing out along the corners of his mouth. It was at this moment that Azure Dragon felt his powerlessness. Obviously. I've just seen hope. Obviously. I have already broken through the shackles of life. But why, again, do you want me to despair at this moment? Azure Dragon changed back to his human stance, and in front of the black and white commander's formidable strength, he surprisingly did not have the slightest ability to resist. I should have been a genius with an extraordinary future, but why did fate play such a joke on me? On Azure Dragon's body, his strength had been completely drained. He gave up resisting and looked up to the sky with a bitter smile, exclaiming the injustice of fate. Genius? Hearing Azure Dragon's words, the black and white commander unexpectedly laughed coldly. Which one that can break through to the 5th life level is not a genius? When I was in the Wuluan Empire, I was also known as a peerless genius among millions of people. But today, I'm still not just a commander in the ability user troop. You think too highly of yourself. The black and white commander used his mind power to form a chain, binding Azure Dragon to death. Azure Dragon was taken aback. You could kill if you want to, what is this for? The black and white commander sneered. "Do you think we came all the way here just to kill a nobody like you?" He did not explain anything with Azure Dragon, but instead sent a message to Silver Armor. "General, the target has been captured." Above the sea, the battle between Silver Armor and Black Tortoise was not divided into winners and losers, but the highs and lows were immediately visible. Black Tortoise relied on his transformed body and the oppression of space-based weapon in space to keep Silver Armor from killing him for a short period of time. However, his originally thick armor was already scarred, and blood filled out from among his flesh and blood, staining the entire sea. His left forelimb had been blasted to pieces, and his armor was full of cracks and pits. However, he was still steadily floating in the middle of the ocean, and in his calm eyes, he had the determination to fight to the death. Silver Armor was planning to continue his attack and kill this huge sea beast when an ominous feeling gradually enveloped his heart. Rumble! A dull rumbling sound came from the depths of the ocean. Silver Armor's footsteps that originally wanted to advance immediately stopped at this time. As if he suddenly sensed something, he unexpectedly turned around immediately and flew towards the Eastern Ocean. "It's time, mission accomplished, retreat." He gave such an order to the combat troops. In a moment, all the Misty Valley warriors who were still in a fighting state immediately stopped killing in their hands and rose into the air in unison, flying towards the Eastern Ocean of East Sea City, which was the direction of Star Island, under the leadership of Black and White Commander. When Vermilion Bird saw this scene, she was in a state of shock and uncertainty in her heart. This battle wasn't an easy one for her to fight either. The Misty Valley elites that attacked East Sea City were all captain-level existences, and unlike Liang Yu, she had not obtained the Source of God and was only one step away from breaking through the life boundary. Seeing all the Misty Valley warriors suddenly leave, everyone in the middle of the battlefield breathed a huge sigh of relief. At this moment, the ground was filled with corpses, all of which were human warriors. This was because when the other party left, they also took away the corpses of their companions with ease. Blood flowing into rivers, corpses piled up into mountains, at this moment was a scene that was incomparably real. The blood underneath the soles of the feet could not even go past the ankles. Vermilion Bird's eyes cautiously raised her head to look at them, and suddenly she saw a familiar figure. Azure Dragon was being controlled by the black and white cage with a chain of psychic barrier and was being carried into the distance. Azure Dragon. Vermilion Bird was shocked and furious as she roared, immediately about to vibrate her wings to chase after it. But Black Tortoise's warning rang in his ears. "Vermilion Bird. Do you want to go over and get yourself killed?" Vermilion Bird's body shook violently. Yes, she wanted to go over to save the others, but who was she to do that? Even Black Tortoise couldn't defeat that mysterious Silver Armor man. Even the Black and White Armor Warrior Commander by his side had shown great strength. At this moment, what could Vermilion Bird do to save Azure Dragon? Her face turned pale in an instant, and she was only able to watch as Azure Dragon, whose life and death were unknown, was taken away by the Misty Valley troops as they quickly disappeared into the night sky. Soon, the eye could no longer catch their shadows. East Sea City was plunged into a dead silence and sadness. They didn't know whether they should be sad or glad. Because of this battle, 2/3 of East Sea City's elites died in battle, and even Azure Dragon, one of the four spirits, was taken captive by others. However, it was fortunate that those terrifying enemies had left. Otherwise, even if East Sea City was able to defend this battle, the vast majority of their warriors would have died here. Vermilion Bird crashed to the ground disheveledly, but a moment later, she raised her head violently, her gaze becoming resolute once more. There's no time to be sentimental. What East Sea City is facing now is a major crisis of survival. The post-apocalyptic world was cold and merciless. The enemy would not show you mercy because you were sentimental. They would only take advantage of your illness to kill you. If you were to be devastated by the loss of a comrade, then you would not be a qualified warrior. Therefore, even if your heart is saddened, you must swallow your tears and continue to fight. Chapter 1620 Military Tao Killing Fist. The East Sea region was dead silent, a messy place, a city full of corpses. In the Operations Command Center, the Supreme Commander of the East Sea region, Li Guangxiao, sat back in his chair disheveledly, his head lowered, his face distorted. The emotion of incomparable grief was reflected on his face. After this battle, the East Sea region was greatly wounded, and it was unknown how long it would take for a large number of warriors to be retrained. Population, itself, was one of the most valuable resources in the midst of the end times. Not to mention, their Epsilon Azure Dragon was suspected to have been killed by the enemy. This was even more of an unacceptable loss for the East Sea region to endure. For quite a long time to come, it would be difficult for them to form an effective combat force to fight against the naval fleet of the ocean overlord Columbia. Still, he had to pull himself together. Now was not the time for him to be disheveled. Immediately organize manpower to rescue the injured. Order the medical forces to go ahead and treat Black Tortoise, Vermilion Bird and mutants above the captain level. Issue a notice to the entire city that we have won this defense battle of East Sea City to appease the people. Also, the destroyed city walls have to be repaired in time. There are also corpses that have to be disposed of in a timely manner, lest they breed a plague. Also pay attention to the movements around the ocean to avoid anyone taking advantage of the fire. Li Guangxiao's appearance made the subordinates around him feel greatly relieved. They were all unusually disheveled at this time, and their hearts could almost be said to be filled with despair. But seeing that the officer was still calmly commanding the entire situation, it again made them see the hope for the revival of the East Sea region. "Yes, Commander. I will immediately order someone to carry it out." The subordinate officials around them followed suit and immediately went to organize the post-war maintenance work. Only after seeing that everything was functioning in an orderly manner again did Li Guangxiao sit back in his chair. He propped his chin up with both hands, and his face was terribly gloomy. If Columbia's navy marched in at a time like this, they were afraid that it would be difficult to resist and would face an extinction. Just at this time, the clerk came over and reported a piece of news to him. After hearing this news, Li Guangxiao's eyes flashed with incredulity before he lay down inside the sofa seat with a sense of relief. It's finally a blessing in misfortune. This was because the news he received was that at the same time that the East Sea region was attacked, Columbia's Columbus Ocean Fleet stationed in Neon Harbor Bay was similarly attacked by a mysterious force and suffered heavy casualties. Neon Harbor Bay, where Columbia Ocean Fleet was stationed. A large portion of the huge harbor was submerged by seawater at this moment. A single roar from the giant sea beast incarnated by Silver Armor General could induce a tsunami that would engulf the entire harbor. Cardalus could similarly manipulate seawater, but in terms of ability level, he was far worse than Silver Armor. Even though he could rely on the power of the heavenly dimensional weapon and space-based weapon to temporarily face off against him, at most, he could only defend himself, and could not achieve victory at all. As the battle continued, Silver Armor had already figured out the characteristics of his abilities, and his attacks became more and more reckless. In this battle, all of the Columbia Navy's reserves were pulled out. For the first time, they showed the world their weapon systems after the end of the world. All kinds of powerful mutant-specific missiles, 7th-generation white-headed eagle-armed fighters, and powerful artillery batteries. All fear came from a lack of firepower, and the effects of thermal weapons against mutants would be weakened, but not nullified. Other than mutants like Zhang Yi, who possessed near immunity to most physical attacks, others would still be threatened by large-yield thermal weapons. Even the existence of underground civilizations was equally so. In this battle, the losses of the Columbia Navy were even heavier than the East Sea region. After all, giant sea beasts could directly destroy naval bases, causing the vast majority of warships to turn into scrap metal and sink to the bottom of the sea. In terms of time, the battlefield in Jiangnan region erupted into war later. The one that was invaded almost simultaneously with it, and perhaps a little earlier, was the Northeast region. Compared to the East Sea region and the Columbia Naval Base, the war in the Northeast region had reversed a situation that was about to collapse due to the addition of the National Protectorate Army. Han Shanzhua had the sense to leave and deal with the black and white commander and the other green armor warriors on his own. The main battlefield of Fengtian City, on the other hand, was left to the commander of the National Protectorate Army, Qin Xuanba. With the northern wind blowing harshly, icy cold wind and snow filled the earth, and the air was filled with a strong scent of blood. Fengtian City was filled with corpses and the scent of death. This man in a military overcoat had even half of his face concealed under the brim of his hat, leaving only the bottom half of his face as resolute as a sword. Across from him, Silver Armor, who was holding a huge sharp blade, narrowed his eyes and stared at the man in front of him. He found it very interesting. Surprisingly, there was a human ability user who dared to provoke him in a dignified manner. But none of that mattered. Everyone who stood in front of his blade had to die. Let me grant you death. Silver Armor raised the sharp blade in his hand. A terrifying and incomparable energy surged out from his body. Even his armor could hardly hide his lanky physique and muscles that almost exploded. Heavenly tilt. He just made the simplest of movements, raising the giant blade in his hand high before slashing down violently towards the front. Boom! In an instant, the air emitted a roar that made one's eardrums want to shatter. As this sword slashed down, the air was stirred wildly, and an incomparably powerful and dangerous force extended out from the air, directly slashing at Qin Xuanba's head. In just a split second, Qin Xuanba raised his head, revealing a sharp, sword-like gaze beneath his military cap. Military Dao Killing Fist. In the face of Silver Armor's attack, he did not dodge or avoid it. Instead, he pulled his right arm into a full bow, and his black deerskin-gloved fist violently slammed towards the forceful aura in front of him. Wind Forest Volcano. As soon as the fist smashed out, a powerful forceful aura took on a spiral shape and wildly blasted out, colliding with Silver Armor's attack in midair. Rumble. The two strands of power chi collided together, forming a huge swirling zone like a man-made tornado, instantly destroying all existence in the surrounding area. The two men immediately realized that the other party was an existence similar to their own, a reinforcement department mutant. The reinforcement department were the mutants who pursued the limits of their bodies, constantly tapping into their body's potential. All they wanted was greater strength, swifter reflexes, faster speeds, and more insurmountable defenses. Unlike other mutants, other types of mutants relied heavily on supernatural abilities. The reinforcement department itself, even without any supernatural abilities, possessed an incomparable combat power of its own. Like Liang Yu, they simply relied on the strength of their own bodies, and the chi energy they condensed was enough to open mountains and split rocks. If Liang Yu was a grandmaster amongst the martial artists, then Qin Xuanba, who had been in the military for 16 years and had fought his way up to the rank of a colonel-level officer with just his pair of fists, and was promoted to lieutenant general after the end of the world, was a grandmaster amongst the military.